Nancy Pelosi political positions. Pelosi was a founding member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, but left in 2003 after being elected minority leader. Civil liberties and human rights. The American Civil Liberties Union's congressional scorecard has given Pelosi a lifetime rating of 92% for her voting record on civil liberties. In 2001, she voted in favor of the USA Patriot Act, but voted against reauthorization of certain provisions in 2005. She voted against a constitutional amendment banning flag burning. Immigration. Pelosi voted against the Secure Fence Act of 2006. In June 2018, Pelosi visited a federal facility used to detain migrant children separated from their parents and subsequently called for the resignation of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. In July, Pelosi characterized the compromise immigration bill by the Republicans as a deal with the devil and noted she had not had conversations with House Speaker Ryan about a legislative solution to the separation of families at the southern border. LGBT rights. Pelosi received a 100% rating from the Human Rights Campaign for the 107th, 108th, and 109th sessions of Congress, indicating that she voted in agreement with HRC's slate of pro-LGBTQ legislative issues. In 1996, she voted against the Defense of Marriage Act, and in 2004 and 2006, she voted against the proposed federal marriage amendment, which would amend the United States Constitution to define marriage federally as being between one man and one woman, thereby overriding states' individual rights to legalize same-sex marriage. When the Supreme Court of California overturned the state's ban on same-sex marriage, Pelosi released a statement welcoming the historic decision. She voiced her opposition to Proposition 8, the successful ballot initiative, which defined marriage in California as a union between one man and one woman. Pelosi states that her Catholic faith is behind her position on LGBT rights such as same-sex marriage, despite the fact that the Catholic Church teaches that marriage is between one man and one woman. Pelosi says, "My religion compels me, and I love it for it, to be against discrimination of any kind in our country, and I consider the ban on gay marriage a form of discrimination. I think it's unconstitutional on top of that." Marijuana legalization. Pelosi supports reform in marijuana laws, although NORML's Deputy Director Paul Armentano said that she and other members of Congress hadn't done anything to change the laws. She also supports use of medical marijuana. PRISM. Pelosi supports the Bush/Obama NSA surveillance program PRISM. On June 22, 2013, she was heckled at Netroots Nation for labeling Edward Snowden a criminal over his actions as a whistleblower. Removal of Confederate monuments. As Speaker of the House, Pelosi quietly moved the statue of Robert E. Lee from the National Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol to the Capitol Crypt. In Lee's place, she had a statue of Rosa Parks erected. In August 2017, Pelosi said she supported the removal of Confederate monuments and memorials from the Capitol building. Waterboarding. Pelosi has stated that she now opposes the interrogation technique of waterboarding. According to the CIA, while Pelosi was the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, she was briefed on the ongoing use of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, including waterboarding authorized for a captured terrorist, Abu Zubaydah, in one hour-long briefing in 2002. After the briefing, Pelosi said she was assured by lawyers with the CIA and the Department of Justice that the methods were legal. Two unnamed former Bush administration officials say that the briefing was detailed and graphic, and at the time she didn't raise substantial objections. One unnamed U.S. official present during the early briefing said, "In fairness, the environment was different then because we were closer to September 11 and people were still in a panic. But there was no objecting, no hand-wringing. The attitude was, we don't care what you do to those guys as long as you get the information you need to protect the American people." However, several top Democratic lawmakers in the House signed a letter on June 26, 2009, alleging that CIA Director Leon Panetta had asserted that the CIA misled Congress for a number of years spanning back to 2001, casting clouds on the controversy. Neither letter, lawmakers or the CIA provided details, and the circumstances surrounding the allegations make it hard to assess the claims and counterclaims of both sides. Officials in Congress say her ability to challenge the practices may have been hampered by strict rules of secrecy that prohibited her from being able to take notes or consult legal experts or members of her own staffs. In an April 2009 press conference, Pelosi stated, "In that or any other briefing, we were not, and I repeat, were not told that waterboarding or any of these other enhanced interrogation techniques were used. What they did tell us is that they had some legislative counsel, the Office of Legislative Counsel opinions that they could be used, but not that they would. And they further, the point was that if and when they would be used, they would brief Congress at that time." Pelosi's office stated that she later protested the technique and that she concurred with objections raised by Democratic colleague Jane Harman in a letter to the CIA in early 2003. Economy. Monetary policy. Pelosi voted against the 1995 balanced budget proposed constitutional amendment, which was passed by the House by a 300 to 132 vote, but in the Senate fell 2 votes short of the two-thirds supermajority required, with 65 out of 100 senators voting in favor. As Speaker of the House, she also spearheaded the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2007 as part of the 100-hour plan. The act raises the minimum wage in the United States and the territories of the Northern Marianas Islands and American Samoa. American Samoa was initially absent from the act, but as part of H.R. 2206 it was included. One Republican congressman who voted against the initial bill accused Pelosi of unethically benefiting Del Monte Foods, headquartered in her district, by the exclusion of the territory, where Del Monte's Star-Kissed tuna brand is a major employer. Pelosi co-sponsored legislation that omitted American Samoa from a raise in the minimum wage as early as 1999, prior to Del Monte's acquisition of Star-Kissed tuna in 2002. As of the 2002, 2004, and 2006 election cycles, Del Monte has not contributed to Democratic candidates. Pelosi opposed the welfare reform proposed by President Bush as well as reforms proposed and passed under President Clinton. She also opposed the tax reform signed by President Trump in December 2017, describing it as probably one of the worst bills in the history of the United States of America. It robs from the future, and it rewards the rich and corporations at the expense of tens of millions of working middle-class families in our country. She said this is Armageddon and argued that the tax bill increased the debt in a way that would cause an adverse impact on social insurance spending. In January 2018, shortly after the tax bill was passed, Pelosi was asked by a reporter to respond to statements by companies attributing the tax cuts for allowing them to raise wages and give bonuses. She said that given the benefits that corporations received from the tax bill, the benefits that workers got equated to crumbs. Most companies that awarded bonuses gave out payments of hundreds of dollars, while some gave bonuses of significantly over $1,000. Infrastructure. In November 2018, Pelosi stated that she had spoken with President Trump on infrastructure development, and though he really didn't come through with it in his first 2 years in office despite it being a topic during his campaign, the subject had not been a partisan matter in Congress. She mentioned potential bipartisan legislative initiatives that would create good-paying jobs and will also generate other economic growth in their regions. Disaster relief. In August 2018, after President Trump signed an emergency declaration for federal aid in combating the Carr Fire in Northern California, Pelosi lauded the move as an important first step but requested the president adhere to a wish by California Governor Jerry Brown for further aid to other hard-hit areas in California. She called for the Trump administration to take real, urgent action to combat the threat of the climate crisis, which is making the wildfire season longer, more expensive and more destructive. Education. In 1999, Pelosi voted against the 10 Commandments being displayed in public buildings, including schools. Pelosi voted for the No Child Left Behind Act, which instituted testing to track students' progress and authorized an increase in overall education spending. Environment. In 2019, Pelosi said that climate change was the existential threat of our time, and called for action to curb climate change. Pelosi has supported the development of new technologies to reduce U.S. dependence upon foreign oil and remediate the adverse environmental effects of burning fossil fuels. Pelosi has widely supported conservation programs and energy research appropriations. She has also voted to remove an amendment that would allow for oil and gas exploration in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Pelosi has blocked efforts to revive offshore oil drilling in protected areas, reasoning that offshore drilling could lead to an increase in dependence on fossil fuels. Healthcare. Speaker Pelosi was instrumental in the passage of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. Pelosi was a key figure in convincing President Barack Obama to continue pushing for health care reform after the election of Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown in a January special election, a defeat that was seen as potentially fatal to Democratic reform efforts. After delivering 219 votes in the House for Obama's signature health care package, Pelosi was both praised and heckled as she made her way to Capitol Hill. Pelosi has voted to increase Medicare and Medicaid benefits. She does not endorse Senator Bernie Sanders' bill for single-payer health care. On March 10, 2017, Pelosi stated that Democrats would continue battling Republican efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act but would also be willing to form a compromise measure in the event that Republicans were unable to pass a compromise bill and reached out for bipartisan support. She indicated her support for the Republican plan to expand health savings accounts and said the question of Republicans accepting an expansion of Medicaid was important. In September, Pelosi sent a letter to Democrats praising Senator John McCain for announcing his opposition to the latest Republican effort to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act and called for both lawmakers and advocacy groups to put pressure on Republicans in the health care discussion. Pelosi said the Democrats would be unified as putting a stake in the heart of this monstrous bill. In July 2018, during a speech at Independence First, Pelosi said the goal of the Democrats has always been to expand coverage and to do so in a way that improves benefits, and we have to address the affordability issue that is so undermined by the Republicans. In November 2018, after the Democrats gained a majority in the House following the 2018 midterm elections, Pelosi said, "I'm staying as Speaker to protect the Affordable Care Act. That's my main issue, because I think that's, again, about the health and financial health of the America's families, and if Hillary had won, I could go home." She furthered that Republicans had misrepresented their prior position of being opposed to pre-existing conditions during the election cycle and called for Republicans to join Democrats in removing all doubt that the pre-existing medical condition is the law, the benefit is the law of the land. Abortion. Pelosi voted against the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act of 2003 and earlier attempts at similar bans, and voted against the criminalization of certain situations where a minor is transported across state lines for an abortion. H.R. 748, passed. She has voted in favor of lifting the ban on privately funded abortions at U.S. military facilities overseas. HA 209, rejected, in favor of an amendment that would repeal a provision that forbids service women and dependents from getting an abortion in overseas military hospitals. HA 722, rejected, in favor of stripping the prohibition of funding for organizations working overseas that uses its own funds to provide abortion services or engage in advocacy related to abortion services. HA 997, rejected. She also voted in favor of the 1998 Abortion Funding Amendment, which would have allowed the use of district funds to promote abortion-related activities, but would have prohibited the use of federal funds. In February 2009, Pelosi met with her bishop, Archbishop George Niederauer of San Francisco, and with Pope Benedict XVI as a result of comments she made to Tom Brokaw on Meet the Press that many observers felt inaccurately portrayed church teaching on the subject of abortion and the beginning of life. Contraception. In a January 25, 2009 interview with George Stephanopoulos for ABC News, Pelosi said, "Well, the family planning services reduce cost. They reduce cost. The states are in terrible fiscal budget crises now, and part of what we do for children's health, education and some of those elements are to help the states meet their financial needs. One of the initiatives you mentioned, the contraception, will reduce costs to the states and to the federal government." Security. Gun laws. Pelosi stands in favor of increased background checks for potential gun owners, as well as the banning of assault weapons. In February 2013, she called for the boldest possible move on gun control, similar to a stance made just weeks earlier by former representative, mass shooting victim, and fellow gun control advocate Gabrielle Giffords. In 2012, She was given 0% ratings by both the National Rifle Association and Gun Owners of America for her stances on gun control. In February 2018, following the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, Pelosi said Republicans cowering to the gun lobby was an assault on our whole country and that the victims were paying the price for our inaction. She requested House Speaker Ryan and Republicans take action via consideration of legislation expanding background checks or authorizing researchers to use federal dollars to examine public health as it relates to gun violence. Pelosi also advocated for the creation of a special committee on gun violence and noted Republicans had previously created committees to investigate Planned Parenthood and the 2012 Benghazi attack. In November 2018, after the Thousand Oaks shooting, Pelosi released a statement saying Americans deserve real action to end the daily epidemic of gun violence that is stealing the lives of our children on campuses, in places of worship and on our streets, and pledged that gun control would be a priority for House Democrats in the 116th United States Congress. Military draft. With regard to Representative Charles Rangel's DNY plan to introduce legislation that would reinstate the draft, Pelosi stated that she did not support such legislation. Use of government aircraft. In March 2009, the New York Post wrote that the conservative watchdog group Judicial Watch obtained emails sent by Pelosi's staff that requested that the United States Air Force, USAF, provide specific aircraft, a Boeing 757, for Pelosi to use for taxpayer-funded travel. Pelosi responded that the policy was initiated by President Bush due to post-9/11 security concerns. Pelosi was third in line for presidential succession, and was initially provided for the previous Speaker Dennis Hastert. The Sergeant-at-Arms requested, for security reasons, that the plane provided be capable of non-stop flight, requiring a larger aircraft. The Pentagon said no one has rendered judgment that Pelosi's use of aircraft is excessive. Trump presidency. During a news conference on June 9, 2017, after a reporter asked her about tweets by Trump responding to the testimony of former FBI James Comey before the Senate Intelligence Committee, Pelosi said no one at the White House seemed courageous enough to tell Trump that his tweets were beneath the dignity of the presidency, and said that she was worried about his fitness. In November, when asked about Democrats beginning the impeachment process against Trump in the event they won a majority of seats in the 2018 elections, Pelosi said it would not be one of their legislative priorities, but that the option could be considered if credible evidence appeared during the ongoing investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election. In January 2018, Pelosi referred to Trump's 2018 State of the Union address as a performance that was without serious policy ideas that both parties could collaborate on. She questioned Trump's refusal to implement Russian sanctions after over 500 members of Congress voted to approve them. In February, after Trump blocked the release of a Democratic memo by the Intelligence Committee, Pelosi said the act was a stunningly brazen attempt to cover up the truth about the Trump-Russia scandal from the American people and part of a dangerous and desperate pattern of cover-up on the part of the president, who had shown he had something to hide. In March, Pelosi stated that she was more concerned about the president's policies which undermine the financial security of America's working families than the Stormy Daniels-Donald Trump scandal. Pelosi did note the scandal as having highlighted double standard of Republicans on issues of family values and expectations of presidential behavior, saying the party would be very involved if the event was happening to a Democrat. In April, following Scooter Libby being pardoned by Trump, Pelosi released a statement saying the pardon sends a troubling signal to the president's allies that obstructing justice will be rewarded, and that the idea of those who lie under oath being granted a pardon poses a threat to the integrity of the special counsel investigation, and to our democracy. On August 15, after Trump revoked the security clearance of former CIA Director John Brennan, Pelosi stated the move was a stunning abuse of power and a pathetic attempt to silence critics in an attempt by Trump to avoid attention to other issues of his administration. Pelosi and Charles E. Schumer met with Trump and Pence in December 2018 to discuss changes to be made when the new Democratic representatives takes office in 2019. Foreign Affairs. China. In March 2008, after a meeting with the Dalai Lama, Pelosi criticized the People's Republic of China for its handling of the unrest in Tibet and called on freedom-loving people worldwide to denounce China. She was quoted as saying, "The situation in Tibet is a challenge to the conscience of the world," while addressing a crowd of thousands of Tibetans in Dharamshala, India. In October 2008, Pelosi commended the European Parliament for its bold decision to award the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought to Chinese dissident and human rights activist Hu Jia. Pelosi's statement read, "I call on the Chinese government to immediately and unconditionally release Hu Jia from prison and to respect the fundamental freedoms of all the people in China." Pelosi criticized the imprisonment of Hong Kong democracy activists in August 2017 for their roles in a protest at the Civic Square in front of the central government complex in Hong Kong. She called the ruling an injustice that should shock the conscience of the world. Before the Trump administration takes concrete measures against China in late March 2018, Pelosi and other Democratic leaders pressed President Trump to focus more on China and take real punishments such as fulfill his own campaign commitments to label China a currency manipulator and stop China from pressuring U.S. tech companies into giving up intellectual property rights. Pelosi urged Trump to take a strong stand against unfair market barriers in China. Colombia. Pelosi publicly scolded Colombian President Álvaro Uribe during Uribe's May 2007 state visit to America. Pelosi met with Uribe and later released a statement that she and other members of Congress had expressed growing concerns about the serious allegations of links between paramilitary groups and Colombian government officials. Pelosi also came out against the Colombian Free Trade Agreement. Cuba. In 2008, Pelosi said, "For years, I have opposed the embargo on Cuba. I don't think it's been successful, and I think we have to remove the travel bans and have more exchanges, people-to-people exchanges with Cuba." In 2015, Pelosi supported President Obama's Cuban thaw, a rapprochement between the U.S. and Castro's regime in Cuba, and visited Havana for meetings with high-level officials. First Gulf War. Pelosi opposed U.S. intervention in the 1991 Gulf War. Iran. In a February 15, 2007, interview, Pelosi noted that Bush consistently said he supports a diplomatic resolution to differences with Iran and I take him at his word. At the same time, she said, "I do believe that Congress should assert itself, though, and make it very clear that there is no previous authority for the president, any president, to go into Iran." On January 12, 2007, Congressman Walter B. Jones of North Carolina introduced a resolution requiring that, absent a national emergency created by an attack, or a demonstrably imminent attack, by Iran upon the United States or its armed forces, the President must consult with Congress and receive specific authorization prior to initiating any use of military force against Iran. This resolution was removed from a military spending bill for the war in Iraq by Pelosi on March 13, 2007. In July 2015, Pelosi said she was convinced Obama would have enough votes to secure the Iran nuclear deal, crediting the president with having made a very strong and forceful presentation of his case supporting the nuclear agreement with Iran and called the deal a diplomatic masterpiece. In 2016, Pelosi argued against the passage of two bills that if enacted would block Iran's access to the dollar and impose sanctions for its ballistic missile program, regardless of whether you supported the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. "We all agree that Iran must not possess a nuclear weapon. At this time, the JCPOA is the best way to achieve this critical goal." In May 2018, after Trump announced his intention to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal, Pelosi said the decision was an abdication of American leadership and particularly senseless, disturbing and dangerous. Iraq War. In 2002, Pelosi opposed the Iraq resolution authorizing President Bush to use military force against Iraq, while stating that Iraq, like other countries of concern, had WMDs. In explaining her opposition to the resolution, Pelosi noted that Central Intelligence Agency Director George Tenet had told Congress that the likelihood of Iraq's Saddam Hussein launching an attack on the U.S. using weapons of mass destruction was low. "This is about the Constitution," Pelosi said. "It is about this Congress asserting its right to declare war when we are fully aware what the challenges are to us. It is about respecting the United Nations and a multilateral approach, which is safer for our troops." Despite Pelosi's opposition, Congress still passed a resolution authorizing President Bush to use the armed forces of the United States against Iraq. Although Pelosi voted against the Iraq War, anti-war activists in San Francisco protested against her voting to continue funding the war. UC Berkeley political scientist Bruce Kane said that Pelosi had to balance the demands of her anti-war constituency against the moderate views of Democrats in tight races around the country in her role as minority leader. Pelosi has never faced a serious challenger to her left in her district. Israel. Pelosi reaffirms that America and Israel share an unbreakable bond, in peace and war, and in prosperity and in hardship. Pelosi emphasized that a strong relationship between the United States and Israel has long been supported by both Democrats and Republicans. America's commitment to the safety and security of the State of Israel is unwavering. However, the war in Iraq has made both America and Israel less safe. Pelosi's voting record shows consistent support for Israel. Pelosi voted in favor of the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995, which urged the federal government to relocate the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Prior to 2006 elections in the Palestinian Authority, she voted for a congressional initiative disapproving of participation in the elections by Hamas and other organizations defined as terrorist by the legislation. She agrees with the current U.S. stance in support of land for peace. She has applauded Israeli hopeful signs of offering land, while criticizing Palestinian threats of not demonstrating peace in turn. She states, if the Palestinians agree to coordinate with Israel on the evacuation, establish the rule of law, and demonstrate a capacity to govern, the world may be convinced that finally there is a real partner for peace. During the 2006 Lebanon War, Pelosi voted in favor of Resolution 921 on the count that the seizure of Israeli soldiers by Hezbollah terrorists was an unprovoked attack and Israel has the right, and indeed the obligation, to respond. She argues that organizations and political bodies in the Mideast like Hamas and Hezbollah have a greater interest in maintaining a state of hostility with Israel than in improving the lives of the people they claim to represent. Pelosi asserts that civilians on both sides of the border have been put at risk by the aggression of Hamas and Hezbollah in part for their use of civilians as shields by concealing weapons in civilian areas. In September 2008, Pelosi hosted a reception in Washington with Israeli Knesset Speaker Dalia Yitzhak, along with 20 members of Congress, where they toasted the strong friendship between Israel and the United States. During the ceremony, Pelosi held up the replica dog tags of the 3 Israeli soldiers captured by Hezbollah and Hamas in 2006 and stated that she keeps them as a symbol of the sacrifices made, sacrifices far too great by the people of the State of Israel. Pelosi supported Israel in the 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. In March 2018, Pelosi said that there is no greater political accomplishment in the 20th century than the establishment of the State of Israel. North Korea. Nancy Pelosi is one of the few members of Congress to have traveled to North Korea. She has expressed concern about the danger of nuclear proliferation from the North Korean regime, and the ongoing problems of hunger and oppression imposed by that country's leadership. In August 2017, following Trump warning that North Korea will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen in the event of further threats to the United States, Pelosi said the comments were recklessly belligerent and demonstrate a grave lack of appreciation for the severity of the North Korean nuclear situation. His saber-rattling and provocative, impulsive rhetoric erode our credibility. In November 2017, after the Pentagon sent a letter to lawmakers stating a ground invasion was the only way to destroy all of North Korea's nuclear weapons without concern for having missed any, Pelosi stated she was concerned about both Pyongyang selling nuclear technology to third parties in North Korea and called for the United States to exhaust every other remedy. In June 2018, after Trump praised North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Pelosi said in a statement, in his haste to reach an agreement, President Trump elevated North Korea to the level of the United States while preserving the regime's status quo. Russia. In December 2017, Pelosi wrote a letter to Speaker Paul Ryan advocating for the continued House investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election on the grounds that Americans deserved a comprehensive and fair investigation into Russia's attack on America's democracy and national security being at stake. Pelosi cited the need for Congress to fully investigate Russia's assault on our election systems to prevent future foreign attacks. In February 2018, after the release of the Republican report alleging surveillance abuses by the Justice Department, Pelosi accused Trump of siding with President of Russia Vladimir Putin at the expense of preserving intelligence sources and methods. In July, Pelosi asserted that Trump was afraid to mention the 12 indictments against people connected to the intelligence community in Russia during his meeting with Putin and questioned what intelligence the Russians had on Trump to cause his behavior. She said that Putin would not be welcomed by Congress even if he visited Washington as a result of his actions, Putin's ongoing attacks on our elections and on Western democracies and his illegal actions in Crimea and the rest of Ukraine deserve the fierce, unanimous condemnation of the international community, not a VIP ticket to our nation's capital. She called for House Speaker Ryan to make clear that there is not, and never will be, an invitation for a thug like Putin to address the United States Congress. Syria and Libya. Pelosi supports the Syria Accountability Act and Iran Freedom and Support Act. In a speech at the AIPAC 2005 annual conference, Pelosi said that for too long, leaders from both parties haven't done enough to put pressure on Russia and China, who are providing Iran with technological information on nuclear issues and missiles. If evidence of participation by other nations in Iran's nuclear program is discovered, I will insist that the administration use, rather than ignore, the evidence in determining how the U.S. deals with that nation or nations on other issues. In April 2007, she visited Damascus and stated that the road to Damascus is a road to peace. Pelosi supported the NATO-led military intervention in Libya in 2011. She also favored arming Syria's rebel fighters. Turkey. In mid-October 2007, after the House Foreign Affairs Committee passed a resolution to label the 1915 killing of Armenians by Ottoman Turks as genocide, Pelosi pledged to bring the measure to a vote. The draft resolution prompted warnings from President Bush and fierce criticism from Turkey, with Turkey's Prime Minister saying that approval of the resolution would endanger U.S.-Turkey relations. After House support eroded, the measure's sponsors dropped their call for a vote, and in late October Pelosi agreed to set the matter aside.